The first laugh wasn't ours. The great conclave of civilized species had never been so crowded. Inside the crystalline orbiting structure known as the spiral seat, over 40 alien delegations hovered in atmospheric pods or reclined in organic shells. It was the largest meeting called in 200 cycles, and the reason floated above them a broadcast from a void zone, and not just any zone, a place they had all classified as impossible. Void zones were dead stretches of the universe, regions where the mysterious Higgs boson's particles needed for psychic abilities faster than light folding and galactic-level biology were nearly absent. No life could evolve there. No technology could function reliably. It was cosmic wilderness, cold, forgotten. Until now. A signal had emerged from the deepest part of a void zone in Sector Black, crude at first low-frequency pulses and geometric modulations, then structured patterns, then spoken language. At first, the delegates laughed. It had to be artificial noise. The first speaker, Ambassador Ellie of the Ferrex Dominion, had jokingly called it Void Babel. A wave of amusement passed through the chamber. It sounds like a child's attempt to mimic quantum structure, chirped a representative from the silken-voiced Savari choir. Another added, perhaps a dying probe learning to dream. But then came the second transmission. This time, it wasn't noise. It was math, a self-referencing sequence of equations describing universal constants, hydrogen binding energies, the gravitational signature of binary pulsars, and a three-dimensional star map pointing directly to the Council's homeworld. The laughter faded, and then came the voice. We are human. We seek understanding. We speak with intent. The room fell silent. No translator was active. Yet the message came through perfectly translated in every native tongue through raw comprehension. Each species heard their own language spoken with startling precision and nuance. They rechecked the signal. It was real, and it had come from the very heart of the dead zone. The Council sent a diplomatic vessel toward the signal's origin, led by a seasoned commander named Seer Venner of the HFY Accord. His crew had orders: verify, observe, and avoid direct contact, unless absolutely necessary. They never expected to find a ship waiting for them, but there it was, floating in the silent dark like a piece of void itself. The vessel shimmered with no light. It had no hard edges, no clear engine ports. It looked like a black cocoon pulsating with faint energy, a strange mix of living tissue and metallic composition. Commander Venner's first officer, Tellys, muttered, "That's not a ship. That's so." In pretending to be one, they hailed it. A human responded, "Welcome, we've been watching, we've listened long enough. May we begin?" The voice was female.com, but what stunned them was the fact that she spoke fluent of the most difficult languages in the known galaxy. It used time-based sentence construction and required vocal modulation beyond the range of most species. Yet the voice spoke it like a native, no stutters, no lag, just pure, perfect meaning. Commander Venner opened a diplomatic channel immediately. The humans introduced themselves as delegates from a civilization known as the Earth Concord. They claimed to have discovered interstellar communication channels decades ago, but remained silent until they fully understood the linguistic and cultural structures of the known galaxy. "Why now?" asked Venner cautiously. "Because now, we're ready to talk." Permission was granted for a formal meeting on a neutral station. When the humans arrived, the Council waited with curiosity and still a hint of arrogance. Even with the flawless communication, they were still just void dwellers, born in silence, raised in darkness. No psychic affinity, no hex resonance, no interstellar heritage. How much could they really understand? The human shuttle emerged from the void, sleek and silent. It glided toward the Council station and docked using a self-morphing hula, design unseen in any known technology. There was no clamp. The ship simply reshaped its skin to seal directly with the corridor, a seamless transition. 3 humans stepped out: Captain Arlen Reyes, Dr. Ilara Miles, lead linguist, and Eliane Tove, engineer and systems expert. They wore body-hugging suits that shifted color slightly with each movement. Their faces were uncovered, expressions calm and open. They bowed slightly as they stepped into the Grand Assembly chamber. Dr. Miles stepped forward and spoke. "In the name of the Earth Concord, we thank you for your attention. We have listened to your cultures. We have learned your music. And now, we speak not to impress, but to understand." Then she did something no one expected. She turned to each ambassador one by one and greeted them in their native tongue. Using rare dialects and forgotten idioms, she recited Valari metaphors from pre-unification poetry, hummed Savari harmonic equations used only in sacred rituals, and even mimicked the scent-based introductions of the Ternai hive with synthesized Pheromones. The council watched in stunned silence. They didn't just translate the language, they understood it. Every nuance, every layer, every cultural fingerprint woven into the words. We have studied not just how you speak, Ilara continued, but why. She then produced a crystalline decipher linguistic archive containing detailed documentation of over 100 galactic languages, including extinct ones thought irrecoverable. We hope this gift is the beginning, she said. The spiral seat was dead quiet. Even those who had mocked humanity earlier now leaned in with awe. How did you do this? One delegate asked Ilara, smiled. We are a species born in silence. In the absence of the psychic noise, we learned to listen harder, to observe longer. We built machines to mirror thought, and then taught them patience. And in that stillness, we heard you. Ambassador Eli of the Ferrex stood. He was no longer amused, he was humbled. He bowed deeply. In all my years, he said, no species has ever spoken to us as you just did. From that moment, the laughter stopped. The council began to see humanity not as primitive voidwalkers, but as something else entirely. Something new. Something they hadn't prepared for. They thought we were guessing, we were mapping their minds. The aftermath of the first meeting echoed through the halls of power like a seismic wave. In every council chamber, on every diplomatic relay network, one question repeated with growing urgency. How had the humans done it? No other species in galactic history had ever learned so many alien languages without direct contact. Not even the cerebral auric dominion with their memory spores. Not even the psychic-born Illinary who could siphon thought itself. Humanity had neither. And yet, the linguistic archive they shared was near-perfect, filled with nuance, symbolism, even philosophical annotations. It didn't make sense. Some called it deception. Others called it a miracle. Dr. Ilara Miles had become the center of it all, though she remained humble in every interview, every conference. Her answer was always the same: we did not guess. We observed. We listened. And when we couldn't hear, we built machines that could. Deep inside the orbiting Earth Concord diplomatic ship Lucid Horizon, those machines existed. Not vast AI networks or quantum translators like the rest of the galaxy expected. No, these were something else, smaller, leaner, elegant in their simplicity. They were called neuroweaves, and they were born from the silence of Earth's void. Ilira's second-in-command, Eliontov, gave a presentation to a curious assembly of alien engineers. He opened a small glass panel on the table before him and laid a neuroweave thread across it. It looked like a single strand of silvery hair, nothing special at a glance. This thread records not just words, Elion said. It records how your species feels when you use them. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. In your broadcasts, there are subtle neural harmonics: tension, mood, hesitation, conviction. We mapped those, and over time, we built a picture of meaning deeper than syntax. We didn't learn the words, we learned you. Attorney Ambassador blinked in disbelief, emitting a low-scented tone of shock. You reverse-engineered emotion from signal noise. Not emotion, Elion replied gently. Empathy. This changed everything. Linguists began requesting. Human assistants generals asked for tactical translators. Traders wanted emotional prediction overlays. And in every request, humans remained calm, collaborative, and cautious. But not everyone was impressed. In the outer rim of the Urix cluster, the Dominion of Savara viewed the humans with suspicion. To them, language was a weapon of influence, and those who wielded it well posed a threat. They had spent centuries mastering diplomacy through domination. These humans, fluent in unspoken tensions, were too dangerous to remain unchecked. They extended a challenge cloaked in formality. Let the humans interpret a living negotiation, Savara Ambassador Threx, VA proclaimed. Let them attempt to translate an unspoken treaty session between rival war tribes of the Poxari. No species had ever successfully interpreted a Poxari negotiation. The Poxari didn't use words. They used ultrasonic pulses, pheromonal gradients, and color-shifting facial glands. Each conversation was a tapestry of instinct, intention, and ancestral memory. Even the Council's most advanced AI systems had failed to decode more than 20%. Humanity accepted the challenge. Ilara, Eliane, and a new member of their team, Dr. Mikkel Reyesa, sensory coder from the Pacifica Institute, entered the meditation chamber on the orbiting arbiter station of YIH-VOK. Inside, to massive, Poxari sat cross-legged, not moving, not speaking, but communicating at full spectrum. The room was thick with invisible meaning. Ilara closed her eyes. Mikkel activated the neuroweave net, a thin mesh applied across his chest, temples, and fingertips. Slowly, he began breathing in rhythm with the pheromonal surges. His pupils dilated. A soft light blinked on his temple as neural patterns mapped to meaning. 10 minutes in, he whispered to Ilara, "They're not arguing, they're mourning what they came expecting, a war. One of them lost a sibling, the other is offering peace through shared silence." Ilara nodded and adjusted her own sensory overlay. She spoke a simple sentence aloud. "The storm has passed. Let the ash speak of loss." The room stilled. The Poxari both turned toward her and then nodded slowly. It was the first time in recorded history that the Poxari war tribes signed a peace compact. Without mediation, news spread like solar fire. Humans hadn't just decoded language, they had decoded intent. The Spiral Council issued a new classification, lingual sovereignty, Tier 1. Only for civilizations had ever received it. Now, humanity was fifth and the youngest by far. But not everyone celebrated. Some feared what humanity might do next. After all, what species could unravel your thoughts while smiling across the table? Speculations emerged. Was it a new form of espionage, a cultural invasion masked as diplomacy? Could their neuroweaves be weaponized? A shadow council of elder races convened quietly in the mists of the Korath halls. Their conclusion: monitor humanity carefully, constantly. Back on the lucid horizon, Ilara received an encrypted message from the Trillion Science Enclave. "We would like to study your neuroweaves in exchange for a demonstration of our own psychic lexicon." Ilara smiled. At the screen and sent her reply, "We would be honored, but fair warning, we may understand you better than you do." For the first time in eons, the galaxy didn't just respect a new species, it feared them, not for their weapons, not for their weapons, not for their fleets, but because they could listen so deeply. They could see your truth before you spoke a single word. And still, Ilara whispered to herself, "We've only just begun." Our silence wasn't ignorance, it was strategy. The galaxy had underestimated humans, not because they were weak, but because they were quiet. For centuries, humanity had watched from afar, their senses buried deep in void-dark observatories, intercepting alien broadcasts like whispers drifting through cosmic winds. They didn't rush, they didn't announce, they studied. Ilara Miles stood at the observation deck of the lucid horizon, watching the brilliant curl of a nearby gas giant roll like a living storm. Around her, the quiet hum of human-engineered systems whispered, no psychic pulses, no energy signatures, just raw silence, punctuated by intention. In the Interstellar Council, silence had always meant one thing: ignorance, a lack of presence, absence of will. But humans had redefined it. Their silence had been a strategy. Aboard the Trillion Science Enclave, the meeting room was filled with curiosity and caution. Trillions were known for their precise emotional auras, projecting thoughts as vivid flashes of colored light. To them, communication was a dance of visible memory. Humans lacked this ability, yet somehow, they still understood. Ilara and Elian stood across from High Scholar Katra, who held a polished crystal sphere pulsing with red hues. "This device," Katra explained, "amplifies thought resonance. It maps our emotions in real time. Your species has no thought light, no psychic field. How do you intend to interact with us?" Ilara stepped forward and simply said, "By noticing what others miss." She placed a device on the table, a black stone-like tablet covered in faint silver lines, a neuroweave core. It didn't glow, it didn't hum, but as Katra looked at it, the sphere in her palm shifted to an emerald hue. "Curious," Katra said. "I didn't intend to project that emotion," Ilara smiled. "But your breathing changed. Your heart rate rose, your fingers stiffened, just slightly. You felt, and we noticed." The Trillion scientists gathered closer. No race had ever mirrored their psychic reflection so well without using hex-enhanced cognition. The humans did it through pattern recognition, through years of watching without speaking, mapping micro-expressions, atmospheric changes, and tonal cadences, in silence. Humans had learned how to listen with more than ears. During the exchange, Ilian brought out a long scroll-like data. It was a linguistic neural cross-map, each line representing an emotion as perceived across 50 alien species. Where the Trillions saw empathy as a burst of light blue, the Savari sang a slow rising note. Where the Dronkai twitched their neck crests, the humans blinked twice and smiled. It wasn't just translation anymore, it was pattern mastery. Back aboard the lucid horizon, Dr. Mikkel Reyes was working on something even more ambitious. While Ilara dealt with diplomacy, Mikkel had been dissecting the structure of alien thought. He believed that at the base of all language spoken, sung, projected, or breath there was a deeper structure, a rhythm. He called it cognitive cadence, the hidden tempo of consciousness. He built a prototype that mimicked this rhythm. It didn't output words, it pulsed. One long pulse, two short, a flutter, a pause. It wasn't speech, but when played into a Core 3 neural lattice, the device triggered a response. The alien's tentacles rippled in recognition. For the first time, a Core 3 being nodded in sync with a human-made rhythm. Mikkel turned to the translator beside him and whispered, "We're not just learning their languages, we're learning their minds." Elsewhere in the galaxy, the echoes of humanity's rise rippled through empires in the halls of the Savara Dominion. Analysts were rerunning every intercepted human message, looking for signs of manipulation. The Savara didn't believe in peaceful knowledge. To them, every act of learning was a tactical advantage. Their war scholars held a secret conclave and asked the question no one dared ask aloud. What if the humans already know everything? We've said, what if they've been listening since before we knew they existed? Panic crept in on the far reaches of the Orion fractals, where the Urian disciples held meditative communion through psionic dream states. A new visitor entered their vision, a human presence still, observing, absorbing. The disciples woke from their trance and spoke a rare prophecy. The silent ones will turn mirrors into windows. The galactic narrative began to shift. Alara received a secure message from Earth Concord Central Intelligence. The language was sparse. The directive was clear. Begin Phase 2. She gathered her team inside the conference dome of the Lucid Horizon. A full holomap of known alien cognitive architecture floated before them, now updated with newly acquired insights from the Trillions Core 3 and Savara. Elian pointed to a star cluster highlighted in red. They still think we don't know about the Iksari dialectic matrices, but we've been tracking their subharmonic field pulses for 3 years. Ilara turned to the others. We're entering a new phase now. They no longer see us as background noise. We're on the map. Every word we say from now on will shape something: alliances, fears, revolutions. Mikkel leaned back in his seat. Good. It's time they understood what silence can build. Ilara stepped forward, her voice steady. For centuries they filled the galaxy with sound. Boasts, broadcasts, declarations. They never expected someone to build power in the shadows. And now, she said softly, we speak, not because we must, but because we choose to. Out there in the void, countless species began preparing new defenses, not against ships or bombs, but against ideas. They scrambled to rewrite translation protocols, tighten data leaks, and encrypt emotions. They feared what humans might understand next, but it was too late. The quiet ones had already mapped the storm before the thunder. We didn't adapt to the galaxy, we reshaped it. The Galactic Council once believed they had seen the pinnacle of evolution. Countless species had formed empires, merged neural networks, ascended into psionic collectives, and even pierced the boundaries of higher dimensions. They thought they had discovered every possible route to power, every way to thrive in the stars, and then humanity arrived not to adapt to the galaxy's rules, but to change them. It started quietly. Humanity didn't arrive with fleets, they didn't bring armadas or mind-dominating pulse fields. They brought ideas, frameworks, languages rebuilt from memory and misunderstanding, tools made not to conquer, but to connect. And it was this unexpected force, the soft engine of empathy, the precise edge of comprehension, that began to rewrite the structure of galactic order. Inside the Lucid Horizons archives, Ilara stood before the linguistic codex core. What had started as a vault of studied dialects was evolving into something stranger. The machine had begun to generate new languages, hybrids, protoforms, cross-species, constructs, not invented by any single culture but born from the spaces between them. The machine called them bridge tongues. Elian reviewed one of them, a hybrid of 3 dead dialects and a rhythmic logic pulse unique to the choral mind of a Winteta. No one speaks this, he murmured. And yet, it makes sense. Ilara nodded. It's not about what's been spoken, it's about what could be spoken. The bridge tongues were quickly adopted in unexpected places. Trade networks in the outer verge began using them as shorthand. Fringe diplomats found them more neutral, easier to convey layered intentions without offense. Suddenly, treaties were clearer. Conflicts cooled. Species that had warred for generations began to listen differently. Not everyone welcomed this shift. On the twin moons of Zaltorn, the Dominion's high priests declared humanity a linguistic heresy. They accused humans of corrupting ancestral speech and infecting cultural purity with alien constructs. Protests flared. A militant wing of the Savara called for sanctions, even armed intervention. Ilara was summoned to a crisis hearing by the Spiral Council. She stood alone before dozens of alien leaders, some radiating distrust, Others cloaked in cold silence. Ambassador Varen of the Savara addressed her directly. Your influence grows unchecked. Your words now travel faster than ships. You are reshaping culture without permission. Ilara didn't flinch. Permission, she repeated calmly. We listened when no one knew we existed. We studied what you discarded. We built understanding where there was only noise. We're not reshaping the galaxy, we're revealing it. Voran's crest flared with indignation. That is not your place. Elian's voice crackled through the diplomatic channel. Then whose place is it? A ripple of discomfort moved through the chamber. The question lingered, that it was then that a new species previously unknown to the council spoke up. The Yashari, beings of flickering shadowlight, addressed the room. Their voice shimmered like wind through glass. We never understood the council's language, the Yashari said, not fully. We nodded when we meant to disagree. We fought when we meant to share. The humans gave us a voice we recognized, not one of translation but one of recognition. Dozens of ambassadors turned, stunned. The Yashari had been council observers for nearly 50 years. They had never spoken aloud before. Ilara bowed. That is all we wanted, to help others speak for themselves. Despite the tension, the council could no longer deny what was happening. The flow of culture, once dictated by the strongest minds, or oldest bloodlines, was now bending toward those who could connect the unspoken. Human neurolinguistic interfaces were now standard. Equipment on over 300 cross-species stations, even species with no written history, were recording memories using human-built sensory glyphs. Tribal civilizations were leapfrogging centuries of isolation and engaging in galactic discourse in months. And while politicians bickered, the people of the galaxy adapted quickly. On the mineral world of Corvin 6, once a lawless mining colony, local leaders used human bridge tongues to settle territorial disputes that had lasted for a generation. On the outer rim station of Vihan's Cradle, the music-based species began uploading their songs to human-built neural libraries, watching in awe as their compositions translated into art, sculpture, and even tactile experiences across different species. And in the forgotten tunnels of the Trin Expanse, a deaf species once thought incapable of complex communication began teaching their light pulse sign language to human diplomats who responded with synchronized holograms. It was the first time the Trin had held a full conversation outside their own kind. The galactic narrative was shifting, not with war, not with fire, but with rhythm, with syntax, with new possibilities of meaning. Still, there were those preparing for confrontation. In a remote sector known as the Shroud Verge, a coalition of traditionalist empires began developing countermeasures, anti-comprehension protocols, semantic scrambling fields, and encrypted psychic walls. To them, humanity's influence was a virus on infection of cultural vulnerability. Earth Concord intelligence caught wind of this escalation. Mikkel Reyes, now head of the Cognitive Interface Division, reviewed the data grimly. They're trying to block understanding itself, he muttered. They want to kill empathy. Ilara stared at the strategic map of growing resistance clusters. Then we do what we always do, she said. We listen, but deep inside her, a fire had begun to burn. She had spent her entire life decoding meaning, finding bridges, building trust. But what do you do when someone tries to erase meaning entirely? What do you do when truth itself becomes a threat? That answer would come soon. And when it did, the galaxy would realize something even more dangerous than a human who speaks your language. A human who understands your silence. They built walls, we built mirrors. The galaxy had entered a new phase. What began as fascination with a strange new species, humans, had transformed into resistance, anxiety, and in some corners, fear. Humanity had not conquered, they had not threatened. They had only listened, learned, and spoken, but it was enough to unsettle the ancient balance. Across the Council's inner systems, barriers were forming. The Savara imposed linguistic quarantine zones, claiming human bridge languages, diluted native tongues. The Zaral Combine introduced neural firewalls against emotional mimicry, labeling human empathy as strategic manipulation. A new interspecies doctrine was proposed, containment of cultural drift. It passed with a narrow majority, but humanity had never built empires with ships or soldiers. They had always been builders of connection, and their strength had never been in what they said, it was in what they reflected. On the lunar capital of Tyrus IV, where 12 species co-governed a sprawling megacity, new communication protocols were introduced. Residents were no longer allowed to use human-influenced bridge dialects. The ban was enforced by predictive surveillance AI tuned to detect cross-syntax usage. Yet, in the underground markets, Children still spoke them, slipping between species sounds with ease, giggling as they reassembled old words into new truths. Vendors haggled using soft meld tongues that felt more natural than the rigid structures imposed by bureaucracy. The people had made their choice. Connection mattered more than control. Ara Miles walked through those very streets in disguise, a thin veil of adaptive cloth hiding her features. She stopped at a food stall run by a Tryphon elder who once could only chirp and flash colors to communicate. Now he hummed softly and pressed glowing keys to express gratitude in a hybrid human Tryphon dialect. "You are welcome, listener," he said, in a voice that trembled with pride. "You made the words gentle enough for me." Ilara bowed slightly. "No, you carried them further than we ever could." Far above, in the spiral seat's shadowed council chamber, the core nations met again. But this time, it wasn't to debate policy. It was to prepare for silence. A classified operation project Reflection was launched in secrecy. Its purpose, to confuse the human neuroweaves by flooding them with artificial emotion feedback loops. If the humans learned by reflecting others, then the strategy was to distort the mirror, force them to see false truths, unravel the signal beneath their empathy. The operation began during the next diplomatic session on Threxelon Prime. The human delegation entered a hall filled with static-coded emotional decoys embedded in the walls. Every word spoken by the alien representatives was wrapped in synthetic grief or false joy, intended to scramble the humans' emotional calibration. Ilara sat quietly. Ilian monitored. Mikkel adjusted the cadence algorithms. At first, they seemed off balance. Her responses slowed. Their translations were less precise. The alien leaders smirked, but humans, unlike the machines that had tried to mimic them for centuries, did not simply read emotions. They watched the gaps. They noted the twitch in a jawline when forced laughter was layered into a greeting. They noticed that eyes narrowed for a fraction too long on a joke that wasn't funny. And in the stillness behind those fake feelings, they saw a pattern. Ilara stood mid-mating and calmly removed her translator band. "We understand," she said. "You want us to see your masks. But we've always been drawn to what lies behind them." The room went quiet. She looked to the Savara envoy, whose people had laced their speech with artificial empathy. "You can feed us emotion, or you can show us truth, but you cannot do both. We built mirrors not so you could admire your reflections, but so you could see yourselves clearly." And then she said something that no one expected. "We won't fight this." Gasps fluttered across the room. "We won't break your walls. We'll respect them," Ilara continued. "But we will remain still. We will keep our mirrors clean, and those who grow tired of distortion will find us waiting." Back on Earth, a message was broadcast not just to governments, but to civilizations across the stars. It contained no demands, no propaganda, just a single shared story, a compilation of first meetings and spoken greetings, hesitant exchanges, laughter over misunderstood metaphors. Each segment was raw, unpolished, not to impress, but to reflect. A story of species trying to understand each other, captured through human eyes. The message went viral. It wasn't translated. It didn't need to be, because somehow, it made everyone feel seen. On the ice world of Velox, a child from the crystalline-speaking Amare tribe watched it and began asking their elders questions about other species. On the fungal rings of Jora, a teacher scrapped her textbook and used human-created cognitive maps to explain universal empathy. And, in the private quarters of Savara, Diplomat Threx 4, the very one who called for Contementa single neural scroll, played on a loop. It was a recording of him, in his youth, trying to speak to a traveling human miner decades ago. The miner didn't understand the language, but he had smiled, tapped his chest, and handed the child a small stone with a carving. "Listen first." Threx sat in silence for hours. Across the galaxy, walls remained. Councils debated. Protocols thickened. But something else was happening, quietly and persistently. People were turning toward the mirrors. Some cracked, some refused, but others leaned closer. Not to see humans reflected back, but to see themselves more clearly. And once a being sees truth in its own eyes, it becomes harder to go back to distortion. The humans knew this. They didn't push. They simply waited, because they understood what the galaxy had yet to accept. True understanding doesn't force its way in. It waits for someone to knock on the door from the other side. Our words changed them, but their silence changed using the vast silence between stars. Something unexpected began to echo, not just the voices of humans, but the absence of those who once mocked them. The walls erected by the older empires had slowed transmissions, rerouted diplomacy, and withdrawn ambassadors. The Spiral Council still functioned, but its energy had shifted. Where there was once pride, now there was caution. Where there was certainty, now there were questions. And amidst that silence, humanity paused to Alara. Miles sat alone on the edge of the Lucid Horizon's observation cradle, looking not at charts or languages or bridges, but at the dark. Not the hostile kind, but the kind that waits. She had spent her entire life helping others speak, helping others hear, but lately, the galaxy wasn't speaking back. That emptiness unsettled her. It had always been humanity's advantage, growing in a place where psychic forces didn't reach, where hex bosons were so rare they were considered myth. It made humans stubborn, yes, but also independent, self-reflective. They had learned to know themselves in silence, and in doing so had become mirrors to others. But now the silence felt different. Elian entered quietly. Sensing her mood, he didn't speak, just handed her a small hollow crystal. It shimmered with dozens of stored translations humanity had prepared for species that now refused to respond. Notes of friendship, cultural invitations, gifts with no recipient, were not being ignored. Elian finally said, "They're watching." Alara nodded. "No, but I wonder if we've gone too far." Mikkel Reyes joined them with his datapad. "You didn't force them to listen," he said. "You just showed them something they weren't ready to see. The truth makes people run. Sometimes," Alara sighed, "but it also makes them grow. I just hope we didn't break something." What none of them knew yet was that across the void, their silence was being felt too. On the remote world of Estianta, the psychic race known as the Vayari had begun to dream differently. They once dismissed humans as sensory deaf, unable to swim in the great current of mind energy that bound many elder races. But lately, their shared dreams carried unexpected echoes, not in voice or tone, but in rhythm, the cadence of human heartbeat, the recursive shape of a spiral thought. They began to wonder, was humanity truly silent or simply speaking in a frequency no one had thought to listen to? A Vayari dream seer named Arsene broke tradition and left his enclave. He did not seek war, he sought understanding. He traveled to the Council's nearest human-affiliated station, requesting only one thing: to sit across from a human with no words between them. Alara met him in a quiet chamber. No translators, no neuroweaves, no interference. They sat for hours. No one knows what passed between them, only that when Arsene returned to his people, he spoke a single sentence: "The silence of humans contains more truth than the noise of kings." From that moment, the Vayari began adding human resonance patterns to their dream chant libraries. They didn't adopt human language, but they made room for it just as humans had made room for theirs. Alara realized something that day. The silence the galaxy gave them wasn't rejection, that it was processing. They had opened doors no one had walked through in ages. They had cracked codes not meant to be cracked. They had removed the safe distance between self and other, and when beings are shown what they look like through another's eyes clearer than ever before, it isn't always met with applause. Sometimes it's met with silence. Not because there is nothing to say, but because what's been seen cannot be unseen. That realization changed the human too. They had spent decades trying to be understood. Now they began to understand something deeper: patience. True communication wasn't about speed. It wasn't even about clarity. It was about timing, waiting until another mind is ready to open on its own. So the Lucid Horizon stopped broadcasting messages of invitation. They stopped sending translation packages and bridge tongues. They stopped reflecting. Instead, they listened again, and something extraordinary happened. From the distant reefs of the spectral world known as Navrala came a single repeating signal, 7 tones, spaced with increasing intervals. The species there had never left their gravity well. No known language, no written record, but the rhythm of the tones was unmistakable. A question. Alara decoded it with Elion over 3 long nights. It wasn't asking for help. It wasn't asking for trade. It was asking for a story. Not data, not theory. A story. The first human tale ever told to another species was not of conquest or invention, but of a child learning to understand the wind, without ever seeing the sky. The signal replied in kind, a story of an aquatic being that found warmth in a volcanic trench, not because it needed it but because it chose it. Both stories meant the same thing, in different voices. Connection. Alara stood before the council once more, not with declarations but with that signal. "This is who we are," she said. "Not translators, not diplomats, just storytellers. And good stories don't shout, they whisper, they wait, and sometimes, they change everything." In silence, the spiral seat, for the first time in its history, didn't answer with applause or protest. It answered with stillness. And sometimes, that's all a story needs to know. It has been heard. We didn't just learn their words, we taught them ours. Years had passed since humanity's voice first echoed through the void. What began with laughter, dismissive, confident laughter, had become something else entirely. The Spiral Council no longer debated humanity's place. The question had changed. It was no longer why are they here, but how have we gone so long without them? The truth was this: humanity never forced themselves into the story of the galaxy. They were environed by misunderstanding, by misjudgment, and by the walls others had built. And when they stepped through the cracks, they didn't try to take control. They simply offered what they always had: perspective. Aboard the Lucid Horizon, now repurposed as a traveling cultural vessel, Alara Miles stood before a gathering of thousands. But this was no council. These weren't politicians or ambassadors. These were students, young minds from over 100 species, gathered not to negotiate, but to learn. They sat together, without translators. No machines, only shared effort. The humans called it the first story room. Each being would take a turn. They would tell a story, not perfectly, not fluently, but honestly. And the others would listen, not for words, but for meaning. Sometimes they would understand, sometimes they wouldn't. That was the point. It wasn't about the precision of language, it was about the willingness to try. When a Corthory child, with 3 vocal sacs, stammered through a human folktale about rain and hope, no one laughed. When a human boy tried to describe snow to a species that had never seen ice, the room went quiet. Then a child from the Sovara, descendants of those who once demanded linguistic containment, stood and asked in a shaky voice, Can I try a human poem?" The crowd leaned in. He spoke slowly but clearly. "We were born in dark, but we learned to glow. We didn't see the stars, so we built our own." Tears glistened in Alara's eyes. They had come so far, not because they were smarter, not because they were stronger, but because they believed something the galaxy had forgotten. Language isn't power, it's a bridge. Outside the story room, aboard dozens of new vessels, bridge ambassadors, humans trained in cultural empathy and multisensory communication, were being assigned to planetary outposts, peacekeeping councils, and refugee clusters. They weren't diplomats, they weren't soldiers. They were witnesses sent to reflect, not dictate. Mikel Reyes had developed new neural learning models that adapted not only to species-specific linguistics, but to emotional maturity. His A is no longer just translated words, they filtered them through kindness. One ambassador was sent to the fractured moon of Hyrak 3, where 2 cousin species had not spoken in nearly a century. The humans didn't teach them a new language, they taught them to remember their own. In a sunken archive beneath frozen soil, human drones uncovered a forgotten series of stone glyph symbols carved not for trade or war, but for music. Humans played the melody, and both sides wept. Another team went to a telepathic world where language had long since faded. At first their presence seemed pointless, but the humans brought something the locals had never seen: books. They read aloud, letting the words echo into silence. Soon the telepaths asked to feel the sound through vibration, through texture, through rhythm. They didn't need to understand the exact words. They felt the meaning and the effort. The galaxy shifted in subtle ways. Treaties now began with shared stories instead of terms. Conflict zones were preceded by shared meals, hosted by human-trained bridgekeepers who asked one question before any talks began: "What story did your people tell when they were afraid?" Because in every culture, no matter how alien, fear was part of the beginning, and so was the desire to be understood. And in the heart of it all, Earth remained quiet. It didn't build fleets or demand a central seat at the Spiral Council. It simply continued to listen. Back on the Lucid Horizon, Ilara prepared one last message. She recorded it in her native language, one the galaxy didn't fully understand, but now wanted to. Her voice was calm, measured, not for command but for connection. "You once laughed at us, and we don't blame you. We came from silence, from the cold edges of everything you thought impossible, but we listened, we learned. And now, you've learned something too, that the smallest voice, spoken with care, can echo louder than the shout of empires. We don't speak for the galaxy, we speak with it. And we will keep listening, until every voice has its story heard." The message wasn't sent on a military frequency. It was uploaded to a shared cultural archive. Within hours, thousands of species had accessed it, not to analyze, not to weaponize, but to feel it. Because at last, the galaxy understood something humanity had always known. Words are just one part of the story. The real power lies in how we use them, and sometimes all it takes to change the universe is to speak the first kind word in a language no one expects you to understand,